Hello, everybody. And on behalf of the Foundation for Self-Leadership, welcome to the first of 3 panel discussions about IFS and the military. Today, we're going to talk about how the military trains us and a bit about the combat experience, and then some about what the reentry process is like when you come back from the military. The next 2 panel discussions will have more to do with IFS, and that will include what we think works with post-traumatic stress disorder and what doesn't seem to work, and some questions about psychotherapy research and how do we know anything. And I think those 2 discussions would be more enlightening with regard to internal family systems work. Today, I'm hoping you guys bring plenty of self to this discussion. My guess is that a lot of you are either IFS therapists yourselves or have spent some time in the military. And I want you to know that all parts are welcome here, as they say in IFS. And at the same time, you may have parts of you that get triggered by some of the discussion that goes on here this morning and this afternoon for some of us. So please know that it's okay to step away if you need to, and this session is being recorded, so you could go back later and catch up on anything that you might have missed through YouTube. Okay. Let's see. So why are we doing this? Several reasons. I think the first one has to do with, what are you laughing at, Larry, already? God. So why are we doing this? We're doing this. I put it under some game. All gave some. You know that we're today especially going to be talking about a group of people who, if you've been in the military, you know what I'm talking about. There's some suffering that goes on there, and for some people, there's a lot. For everybody that's in, there's some. And for some people as well, there are experiences that are, I think, on the outer limits of human experience. And my sense is that we could also all learn from hearing the stories that particularly combat veterans have to tell. And that part of our job as therapists would be to help them tell their story. And that if we all had a chance to listen, meaning the nation would be a better place. I really believe that. Secondly, I think that anybody who's on this call has probably had at least some exposure to the internal family systems approach. And I think it's based, honestly, on a couple thousand years of theology and philosophy. We don't normally introduce it that way, but that's the truth. This concept of the self has been around thousands of years. And a lot of human existence and the belief systems have been, to varying degrees, based on that. So IFS is similarly based, but it has a pretty modern methodology for helping people come to realize who they really are, and in a sense, what life is really about, and hopefully what each of our lives are about. So we are trying to get this knowledge and learning and therapeutic kind of orientation out to as many people as we can. At the moment, these 3 panel discussions are focused on trying to get it out, in particular to veterans and to veterans who are going to be working with other veterans and to the U.S. military community. Thirdly, I've thought over the years here that a lot of people think they know about post-traumatic stress disorder generally, and combat-related post-traumatic stress disorder in particular. And a lot of therapists think that too. But my experience has also been many, if not most, therapists have never been in the military. Only a few actually have served in combat. And, so while it's true, if you if you're going to work with depression, you may not have ever been depressed yourself, clinically speaking, but you probably should do some homework. You probably should read up on it and get at least some idea of what is being talked about. And this is kind of no different. Like, if you really want to work with people who've been in combat and who've been in the U.S. military, I mean, my thought is, well, then you should do some homework at least. And that's kind of what we're going to try to do today, I think, is provide some basis for understanding and maybe further inquiry into what the military experience is like. In addition to that, I mean, I'd have to say, if I'm going to be honest, there are some therapists that look down on the military. And there are reasons for that. I don't think we're going to be able to explore all of that today, but it's something to be aware of, and something to, if you're going to work with veterans, you kind of need to get that sorted out for yourself. We'll probably go into that more in session 2, because there's a number of different dimensions to that. But anyway, that's going to be part of the topic of conversation. So what about our panel here? Well, we've got here 4 people who've served in the U.S. military. We've got 3 people who know something about IFS, and some who've spent a fair amount of time with it over a whole lot of years. We've got 2 people on the panel who are combat vets. So there's a lot of experience here, and I hope that's going to be helpful to you. When I thought about how to introduce the panel, I went to see that movie Ford versus Ferrari, and I I really liked that movie. And there was a point in there at which Carroll Shelby had to introduce himself to a bunch of people. And what he said is, my name's Carroll Shelby, and I build race cars. And I thought, that's really appropriate for what we've got here. We've got Chris, and we've got Larry, and we've got Amy, and you've got me. And that's what we do. We build race cars, except for Larry Snee, who thinks he is a race car. So and maybe he is, and Poe as well. So if you like talking about race cars, and you can kind of excuse that, for the most part, we, meaning the panel, we don't write books too much, and we don't go on the lecture circuit. But if you just want to talk to people who build race cars, we're it. You're in the right place. And we're going to try to be pretty honest with you about all of that. So having said that, I think Amy might lead us off with talking about the military training experience. And Amy, you can be a race car too if you want.
I'm more of a rocket ship type.
I see. Well, all parts are welcome. You do your thing. We're thrilled to have you here today. And what do you have to tell us? And would you say something about your IFS experience and your military experience as well? Your own?
Sure. So hello, everybody. My name is Amy Marcotte, and I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to be here with all of you curious folks. Appreciate the curiosity that you're bringing to the table here to learn about military culture and what, maybe get a glimpse at what it means to have served in uniform in the United States, military. I am the director of the Sanford, Maine Vet Center, and I have worked there as a clinician since 2000, and I've been piloting the rocket ship there since 2002. I'm the director there. And before then, I served in the Big Spring, Texas VA Medical Center as a social worker on the inpatient psychiatric program and the substance abuse treatment program. And before that, my first job as a grown-up was in the United States Army. So I have worked my entire professional career with folks who are in uniform or who were in uniform. So my calling was to serve my brothers and sisters at arms. So as I had mentioned, I am a United States Army veteran. I did not come from a family of soldiers. There was no military family member that I could point to in my family tree. However, I just always had an inkling that I wanted to serve in the military. And I think part of that was I saw the military as a way of perhaps kind of bucking some gender expectations of what a girl could do. So if you tell me, if at that time, if you told me a girl couldn't do something, I'd sure as hell try to prove somebody wrong about that. And I also really kind of saw that as a way to shine in athletic and leadership kind of fashions. And so I just always kind of knew I was going to serve in the Army. I did go to college, and I started up in the ROTC program there. They paid for my college, all my books and all that good stuff. And that's where I really started learning to juggle a lot of different classes and leadership positions and that sort of thing. After I graduated, I went on and got my master's of social work at Columbia University. And once I graduated from there, off to the Army I went to Fort Sam Houston, where they trained me to serve as a medical service corps / social work officer. My first assignment in the Army was with the 10th Mountain Infantry Division. I was actually the envy of all of the other social workers in my class at Officer Basic course, because that was considered a high speed assignment. And I knew as I was leaving Fort Sam Houston in January of 1993 that I would show up at Fort Drum and pretty soon thereafter deploy to Somalia, which I did. I showed up at Fort Drum. They know winter there. I'm from Maine, but man, I'll tell you what, Fort Drum, New York gets the snow. I've never seen so much snow in my life. So it was kind of a weird thing to be showing up there and being issued all of this winter gear, but at the same time being issued all the desert gear as well. I deployed to the 10th Mountain, deployed to Somalia with 10th Mountain Division for 3 months, pretty much by myself as a mental health officer. I joined my unit after everybody else had gone, and as they were coming back, I was going in to replace the whole mental health unit. So my first job was kind of an eye-opening experience in that I had to make shit up. It was pretty daunting. I didn't really know what I was doing, and I was terrified, and I was just lucky to have been blessed with some common sense, maybe some access to self at an early stage in my life. In Somalia, it was a combat zone situation.
Self, yes, Amy. I don't know about common sense with you, but okay.
I have an iota of it here and there. It might have waned throughout as I age. So at any rate, in Somalia, I experienced exposure to combat there, where the roads we were traveling on readily were, mined, and there'd be small arms fire, and somewhere along the line, I picked up the duty of being a civil affairs officer while I was there also. So I was doing missions out to villages where we'd show up and we'd be pelted with rocks, and people would come up and try to grab things off of my uniform and my body and out of the truck and that sort of thing. We'd do this nice thing for the village, and then we'd get a barrage of rocks and sticks thrown at us and that sort of thing.
Amy,
so, yeah.
How do you think that affected you, being on those roads with the minefields and the people coming up to you and trying to take things off of you? Like, how did that affect you as a person?
Um, yeah, let me think about that for a second. So as a person, what I recognize is that in the moment, then I had to really up armor myself and kind of depersonalize the folks that are around me that were trying to steal things from me and do me harm.
Mhm.
And so I can remember in the moment, makes me a little ill to think about this right now, but I carried a stick, and I would have to hit people with the stick to try to keep them from violating my security and my unit's security. So that caused, I think, some guilt and some shame around how I perceived some of the folks in those villages. But at the time I was doing, what I had to do to survive that moment. So, I definitely had a defensive strategy where I had to be very alert and focused. Yeah.
And so did that add some parts to you, IFS wise? Would you say that altered some things or created some things?
Yeah, most definitely, Chris. Yeah. So, it's really where I recognize now. I didn't really know it then, but the training that we get in the military in terms of being situationally aware, and what we might pathologize now is, hyperarousal or hypervigilance, right? That I needed to be that way when I was in Somalia, right? I needed to be able to know who's looking at me funny, who's getting ready to, who's got a weapon, who's, looks like they're carrying something under their garb and that sort of thing. So that, and also emotional numbing. Like I had to really overcome a lot of fear every time we left the wire to go out for a mission. You couldn't be terrified. You couldn't be blended with all of that. You really had to get a lot of separation from that. So manager parts that would numb out, and help me just kind of be alert was I'm very thankful that I had those parts to help me get through that.
Awesome, thank you.
And Amy, do you think that was part of your training as well?
Yeah, definitely. So like in the military, when you go through, I went through officer basic training in ROTC, where we went to Fort Knox in Kentucky for 8 weeks. And, a lot of the training is around developing rituals and routines and body memories about doing things. And we have a saying, suck it up and drive on, right? And and what that basically means is, embrace the suck. If you've got something that hurts, if you've got something that's scaring you, if you've got something that's uncomfortable, deal with it. You got to just push it aside and you got to drive on with the mission. Because, you don't have time to show weakness. You don't have time to tend to little boo-boos and things like that, because you'll get yourself hurt and you'll get other people around you hurt.
Amy, has that caused any personal problems with relationships because you believe in that?
Well, I'm service connected with the VA for post-traumatic stress disorder.
Sure.
Myself. And so yes. What I find mostly is that I tend to kind of hang out in more of the arousal cluster, where if I get aggravated or agitated or overstimulated, I tend to get irritable and not so kind to folks in my vicinity. But also what I've really noticed is the suck it up and drive on. I didn't seek any help for a good decade after I got out of the service. I was a mental health officer. So I was, first of all, I'm a female in the military, where, in an infantry division, you had to really exceed the males around you in how you were operating. Second of all, I was a lesbian, and I was in the don't ask, don't tell era of military, right? And third of all, I was an officer right? And just a soldier in general. And so I had a whole snoot full of keep your mouth shut, keep everything to yourself, and there's nothing to see here. There's nothing wrong with you here. So when I got back, despite having some pretty significant problems going on with my next deployment, with my next assignment at Brooke Army Medical Center, where I had troubles in my relationship, I had troubles in my new assignment, I didn't recognize that as a reaction to my combat experiences. And it didn't recognize it for, years afterwards, because I'm the rock. Right. I'm somebody who's supposed to help somebody else and set a good example. So I certainly had some good stuffing parts.
Yeah, that's it's caused me a lot of problems with personal relationship, PTSD, and the idea that I just need to be the toughest person on the planet gets in the way when someone is suffering around me. Sometimes I just don't have the empathy to be patient with them. I know my sons have suffered from that. I know I've lost many wives because of that, many ex-wives, and it just goes on today. So I understand.
Yeah, I appreciate your sharing that, Larry. Yeah. How about you, Chris?
Well, let me take 2 seconds to introduce myself. My name is Chris Poe. I'm a licensed professional counselor with the Casper Vet Center. I am a father, a husband, goofball. I am many things, and I'll try to tie that in while I'm saying I'm many things down the road, because I think it's important when we talk to veterans that they realize they're not just one thing, and often that kind of is the case, is they believe they're only one thing, and that was in the military. They are a veteran, and that's it. So I've been with the Vet Center for 9 years. I started out as a global war on terrorism outreach specialist, and have climbed my way up, and I'm now the Vet Center director. So let me back up one piece. I was a client before that, and it was myself and a Vietnam veteran decided to come down to the Vet Center together to see what it was all about, because neither one of us were going to go alone. So we had a battle buddy, and we came down, and I was engaged in therapy. I'm a combat vet deployed to Kirkuk, Iraq before 05, and gunfights, rockets, mortars, IEDs, all of that stuff. Service-connected disability for PTSD and alcohol abuse. So I needed a lot of help, and I think we'll get more into this later on in the homecoming section, because that's where I typically meet the veterans, is once they come home and they're thinking, what the hell do I do now? Who am I? Because I don't know who I am, because I'm not in the military, I'm not with my brothers and sisters. So who am I? And that's kind of why I introduced myself as more than one thing, because everyone is more than one thing. Let's see. I was with the 25th Infantry Division out of Hawaii, Schofield Barracks, Alpha Company 121 Gator. I did jobs from rifleman to RTO, which is a radio telephone operator, commanders, RTO, grenadier. I was attached to mortars. Lots of fun stuff. And I'll share more about my experiences about homecoming, both me as an individual and what I see here at the Vet Center on a regular basis. So thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, so Amy, back to you for a minute. Because I know one of the things that I was struck with, when I first went in was, I don't know, just the culture itself, which, I did not grow up in a profanity-free environment, but I never heard anything like what the military had. I mean, it's some of the most creative major league swear words I've ever heard, before or since. And in general, I mean, that seems like it kind of fit with we're going to be tough here, or at least we're going to act like we are. And
Exactly.
And along with that, I thought too, I'm interested in if your experience was the same, that there's a kind of a humor in the military, like, so when stuff goes wrong, which it does all the time, I don't know, there can be like a lot of insults and laughter and pointing out whose fault it was and why. And I've thought, like, most therapists tend to try to be really sensitive and warm and kind of a fuzzy bear,
Except you,
kind of,
Stu.
and I don't think it's like that too much in the military. I don't.
It's not.
No. Well, the thing that occurs to me that's important is, I don't want to be treated like a wounded bird, right? And our vets don't want to be treated like wounded birds either. Despite what I shared about myself being service connected for PTSD, I'm a pretty resilient cat, right? And the folks that I work with at the vet center and the folks that I serve with, no matter the dings and the scratches that we take on, right? Like we're resilient, we're tough, right? We're really, really tough. We've survived a lot. And part of that is, the wry sense of humor and the
I like that wry sense of humor. Take that down.
Giving each other crap and the inner service rivalries and, the dogging each other and talking game and all of that kind of stuff. I can think of an example of when we were in Somalia and we had to remain overnight on a mission. And some young lieutenant thought it was a really good idea to kind of pull out into this big field, and the engineer tried to talk him out of it, but the guy was a commander, and so off we went into the field, and it rained overnight, and every single one of the heavy pieces of equipment sunk into the mud in the morning, and that was a really dangerous situation for us to be mired down like that. But instead of freaking out, the folks I was with really took a really good opportunity to give the lieutenant some crap for it, and to, just kind of like in a good natured way, kind of playfully get those vehicles out of there, despite it being a really dangerous situation. Right. So I think, like the ability to overcome fear and all of that, like that is baked in, I think, with that kind of humor. And really, there's no way that I have found better to express a real true feeling than the many flavors of the F word.
F word.
Oh,
We
so
don't know
true.
what you mean. We have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, and I know, Larry, you can talk about improvise, adapt, overcome.
Let me introduce myself a little bit too. My name is Lawrence Snee. Nobody else in the world except my wife and her family calls me Lawrence. They call me other names and Larry, mostly other names. And I'm a PhD, a rock star. I like geology because I don't have to talk to people, and I can just deal with rocks. And rocks are far more interesting to me than almost anything else. I joined the Marine Corps. I dropped out of college in my first year of college. I had a free ride to the University of Rochester. And I joined the Marine Corps in 1966 because there was a lot of discussion going on at that time about Vietnam. What were we doing in Vietnam? And I thought, I don't understand. This is too much of a conflict for me, so I want to find out for myself. So I dropped out foolishly. I thought, if I want to go to Vietnam, I need to be in the Marines. So that's what I did. I'm a radio telegrapher. I went to 6 months of radio telegraphy school. And so I carried a radio in Vietnam. I was there for 13 months in one day, and I think about an hour. I was in some heavy combat. I lost some good friends, and I think one of my good friends' cousins is listening today, Jack Rowney. Ed Roush was our primary radio operator in one of our combat missions. I was in First Reconnaissance Battalion. Now, we weren't supposed to get in combat. We were supposed to destroy things, destroy people and destroy things, but we were always in small teams. And if we got in combat, it was not a good thing. we got in some serious combat a couple of times, and one of the worst ones was October 17, 1967, when we walked into a large NVA unit just north of Elephant Valley, and we got in combat for 2 days. We were able to get through it the first day and able to walk through an ambush the first day. But then this leads to one of my issues. I have very little respect for authority. There was a major back in our base camp that ordered our patrol leader to attack the hill that we had just walked through, the ambush, and an unknown number of NVA. And there were only a few of us, and the patrol leader was a gunnery sergeant who had served in Korea. He was a really good man, and he said, "Sir, you're asking us to do something that is crazy." And the major said, "You either do it or you'll be court-martialed." And so we charged the hill, and obviously right away we got into a serious conflict, and the patrol leader was killed. The primary radio operator was shot through the handset and was killed. One of my good friends was killed saving another person who was seriously wounded. And we managed to get through that by having an infantry team come in to pull us out. But that was the first of many episodes like that. But the issue is that the major, he just destroyed my whole sense of respect for authority because he got us into a situation that just was unacceptable. But enough about the combat. What I do want to say is that it took a long time for PTSD to actually take effect in me. It actually happened just after 9/11 when, I don't know if you remember, Osama bin Laden was interviewed in videos standing in front of rocks. Well, I'm a geologist, and I've worked in Pakistan and Afghanistan and Tajikistan quite a bit. And somebody smart enough in the spook community realized that maybe some geologists could help them figure out where bin Laden was. So they talked to 4 of us who had experience, and we were able to locate. He was in the Tora Bora area. But that's when PTSD kicked in, because I wanted desperately to be out there going after bin Laden. I wanted to kill the bastard, and I couldn't do it because I was an old man. I was in the U.S. Geological Survey, and I obviously couldn't go into the field and chase down bin Laden. But at that time, PTSD kicked in, and I was ready to kill myself. The only thing that kept me from doing that was a couple counselors, and this is very important for all the counselors out there. A couple counselors, one, Annette Matlock, and also Stu, were able to turn me around and get me through that. And they were able to do that because they were willing to listen and willing to try to understand what I was going through, as well as all the other combat vets who were going through treatment. And the very important thing is that winning a veteran's respect and trust is probably the most important thing you can do in order to help them. Realizing that every veteran has a different experience, even though all the ones who were in a similar battle remember different things. Each one of us has a different view of what happened. And you have to understand these veterans. You have to understand what they went through, and you have to win their trust. So I think that's all I want to say about that, Stu. Move on.
Well, thank you, Larry. I'm touched by your remarks, and I mentioned I don't know, last week or something, the part of this panel had gotten together. The way I think I remember meeting you was I was teaching a class.
Yes.
And there was one guy in the class who seemed to have no respect for authority and kept asking me questions that I could not answer. And so after the class, I said, "Who the hell was that?" And then that was Larry Snee. You know, and I think you're making a bunch of like really important points, as well as some very tender ones about how important it is to realize that as a therapist, combat vets probably not going to trust you right out the gate, and why should they? So winning trust and respect, and it's an ongoing thing. I don't think there's anything you can do just one time. You kind of got to hang in with a lot of humility and realize that these are some of the best people on the planet. They've seen things and learned things that maybe we haven't, and we kind of need to take that in. And it's not that hard to really come to some kind of sincere appreciation and thankfulness for the privilege of spending time with them. So thanks, Larry. That's a lot of good stuff there.
Appreciate it. No, thank you, Stu. You not only did you help me, and you and that saved my life, but you also helped my stepson, who was having serious problems. My wife is Brazilian. The most recent wife is Brazilian, and her son, when we brought him here from Brazil, had some serious issues. So you helped him a lot too. Thank you.
I'd just like to kind of piggyback on the idea around, just developing that trust with veterans when they come to your office. And part of that too is like being really mindful of what implicit biases that you might have around who is and who isn't a veteran, right? Or this idea of who is and who isn't a combat veteran and that sort of thing. Because I would make a general practice of anybody that you have coming to your office, male, female, gay, lesbian, transgender, whatever the case may be, that you ask as part of your intake, are you a veteran, right? And did you serve in a war zone? That's actually a better question to ask than are you a combat veteran? Because a lot of people, male and female, won't identify as a combat veteran. I was a social worker, right? But I'm a war zone veteran, right? Who had combat going on around me. And so it can be very disrespectful to make assumptions about the person sitting across from you. Oh, you were just a cook, right? Well, let me tell you, the cooks in my unit, right, were also doing perimeter duty, right? And that sort of thing. So really checking in with what are your biases around the military and what you think you know. And just be curious about, tell me your story. Tell me about where you served, what your job was. Was it just, what else did you do besides, this particular duty that you're talking about, so I'd just be careful about that because that can be very off-putting and disrespectful.
Yeah, I would say too that in my experience, the people who really have served in the war zone are always telling you that they had it easier than someone else. So yeah, I lost one leg, but my friend lost two.
That's true.
And trying to, it's like if you talk to them long enough, the only person who really deserves any respect is one that died, and then that their injury or what happened to them was really not that important. Well, yes, it is. And it hurts to lose one finger, much less 3 or 4. So I don't know, getting guys to get real about that and stop the denial is a little bit of a trick.
That's
Sorry,
a good,
you were gonna say.
That's a good point, Stu. I've always felt myself lucky that I served as a reconnaissance Marine because I wasn't on the ground all the time. I was on only 34 missions, and those were 5 to 7 days, sometimes longer. But some of these folks, I feel like I lucked out. Some of these folks have gone through some serious issues, serious combat.
Could have been 36 missions.
It could have been 36.
Yeah.
We hear things a lot like, oh, I don't want to take that slot for counseling. There's somebody else out there that needs it more than I do. Somebody's worse off than me. And getting a veteran to recognize and understand that, one, that's kind of irrelevant. It's I really don't want to hear it. And I'll be blunt with them because it's simply not true. Like you were saying, Larry, everyone's experience is different and how that manifests in their life or what part that manifests and overshadows something else is completely different. Everyone needs what they need, and I think that's important to understand as well.
Yeah, that's true.
I think
You
one
know,
of the things that I found helpful to vets when they, and I know for myself, I find helpful is also, I had mentioned, don't treat me like a wounded bird, right? But also to kind of, when you sit and find out, a veteran is, checking the perimeter of their house every night before they go to bed, and making sure the doors are locked, 3 and 4 times before they go to bed, or irritable, or whatever the symptoms of, emotionally numb to the folks that we've talked about, that, emotionally numb to the folks around them, and that sort of thing. That, as I'm hearing about these things, that pretty much tick off all the boxes of what we know is post-traumatic stress disorder, right? To be able to, like, right out of the gate, normalize and honor and recognize how every single one of those symptoms that they reel off that are PTSD symptoms saved their took us in combat, right? Like, they got trained to be that way so that they could come home and bring other folks back with them. So thank God somebody in Iraq got really good at noticing when a piece of litter, a box or something, was on the side of the MSR, main supply route, for convoy, right? Thank God that they could notice that. Thank God they could emotionally numb when something, like, they lost somebody in their unit, like Larry had mentioned, right? So that they could drive on and save the rest of the guys that are alive. I like to make sure that with the veterans, you really honor the fact that the parts of them that really came to the forefront, right, during their military experience were extremely excellent internal team members for them, right? They were their A team, and that the A team just hasn't gotten the message yet, now that they've been home, that they can take it down. They're like the guy, the Japanese guy on that island that never got word that World War II was over with, right? Sometimes our internal system is such that our parts haven't gotten the word that we're not in as dangerous a situation as we were when we were in Vietnam, Somalia, Iraq, or Afghanistan.
That's right.
Yeah. I like to ask veterans when they come in and they kind of tell you what's been going on in their life, be it the locking of the doors and the back to the wall, things like that. I ask them why they think they do that, and it really does boil down to what you said, is because it saved their life and their friend's life next to him, and it's a big deal. And Larry, maybe you can talk about this a little too, and in that feeling of like I was in a patrol base, just our company in the middle of Kirkuk, and so we had big Siberian barriers, which are the big giant concrete walls, basically. And when you felt pretty safe there, right? But then you'd have to go out on patrol, be it mounted or dismounted, and the difference between when you got there in those first couple of weeks and then to when you were there for 3, 6, 9 months, of that feeling of going outside the wire, where initially you're like, this is the worst thing at all, but then something just switches, and a part of you accepts the fact that you potentially will die every time you go outside of this wire, and then it's not a big deal, and you don't react, respond like you did in those first 3 weeks. Is that something similar for you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. In recon, we'd go out on our missions, but then we go back to base camp, which was Camp Reasoner, west of Da Nang, and it was just drugs and alcohol, marijuana and beer. Beer was accepted at that time, and so we spent our 3 days in just getting obliterated, so we just didn't have to think about anything. But when we went out, then the light would switch, or the switch would switch, and the light would go on, and we'd be back in combat, whether or not we were in combat. We would go in the helicopters. All those feelings would be erased. We never did marijuana in the field. If I ever caught any of my guys doing marijuana, it would be a big problem. And I can't remember being afraid of things, except for one patrol when I was standing on the Ho Chi Minh Trail in Laos. And I realized, my gracious, we are up against something incredible. These people are an incredible fighting force. And that was the only time I really felt fear. So, yeah, it's right, Chris. Things change when you go outside the wire, for sure. But back in base camp, we were relaxed. We were very relaxed.
Do you notice any of those?
Amy, let me just interject here. I see, I don't see any questions or comments, and we're kind of new here, or at least I am, about how to involve everybody, but you should have a Q&A box down at the bottom of your screen. And if you have a comment or a question, put it on there if you would, and we'll try to get to you here. I don't think your chat box is going to work if you're in the participants category today, but the question and answer thing should. I'm sorry, what were you going to say, Amy?
Well, I was just curious with Larry sharing in terms of what, if anything, you're noticing, and Chris, you too, how have those parts followed you into civilian life? You know, how do you notice those guys showing up today, if at all?
They sure do show up today. One of the things that happened to me in Vietnam was after the first 3-4 months, I guess, I don't remember any of the people who served with me. And I have a hard time today remembering people's names and recognizing their faces. And I think that's a numbing that must have taken place in me to protect myself from feeling any pain when one of those or two of those guys would die. And they did. And I don't remember their names. One of our guys, I wasn't on this patrol, but one of our guys, a black guy, got the Medal of Honor because he threw himself on a grenade to protect the rest of the team. And I didn't remember him until it came up when his ship was commissioned about 3 years ago. Ralph Henry Johnson's his name. And I was there at the commissioning. I did not remember him. And I felt embarrassed that I didn't remember him. Another guy died with him on that patrol, and I didn't remember him. So, and it happens all the time in real life back here now. I just can't remember people. I don't think I want to remember people.
Yeah, it could be. And so Chris, could you say a little more about reentry? You said you had some additional things, I thought you did, about that you wanted to get in here.
Yeah, sure. So all kinds of things can go well, and all kinds of things can go poorly upon reentry or readjusting to the civilian world, right? A lot of vets feel like they don't fit in. They don't relate to peers like they once used to. If they were in a relationship or a marriage before they left and they come back, roles have changed, right? They don't know where they fit in. If they got out of the military after a deployment, who are they, right? I'm real big on meaning, purpose, and direction for veterans because it seems like when you're in the military, you've got a lot of that. You know exactly what you're doing, you know the objective, you know you have support left and right, and that's meaning, purpose, and direction. And so when you come out and you have all of that removed, veterans can feel stuck, empty, hollow, distant, that they withdraw because they don't have that connection, the camaraderie, the meaning, purpose, and direction. So I think if we can work towards helping them find that, and that can be done wonderfully through IFS and those different parts, helping them identify the managers and the firefighters and things like that. That's going to be really beneficial because, you know, you can take jobs, for example. Veterans struggle to hold jobs. Okay, how come? Well, that's a good question. Well, part of me wants this and the other part of me wants that. Okay, well, let's talk to those parts, right? or I'm always having flashbacks, or I'm afraid. There's so much going on that IFS can grasp onto and help the veteran identify and really learn about how do I get these parts to be, Stu, I'm going to use the wrong word, but not authentic with the self, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So I don't know if this is exactly along those lines, but one of the things I've thought is that, so when a combat vet comes home, the very kind of behavior that he might have gotten heavily rewarded for in the military can even land him in jail, back in civilian country. And that's hard to reconcile. So in the military, you kind of learn, I mean, I think among other things, that violence is an acceptable way to settle some things. That's sort of what it's all about when you get right down to it. And I don't know, that's too simple. It's much more complicated than that. But when you use violence at home, almost universally, you're going to get in trouble, even if you were in the right. So I don't know. There's a question about how do we be honoring to people about what they learned and what they did in times of huge stress in the military, without saying, yeah, it's okay to be this way in the civilian world where it's really not.
There's a question up here. It says, interested in how you've successfully helped the A teams to come home. Those different parts that Amy, I think it was Amy that spoke about them. Can you speak about a maybe a session that involved a veteran and the different parts, and how IFS got them to recognize and work with those parts successfully to reduce either a symptom or the overbearingness of a part?
Yeah, and I think it dovetails nicely with where Stu just finished, right? With the kind of the rhetorical question of, how do you honor, the parts of a military person who had to use violence in one context where it's not acceptable and can cause a lot of problems in the civilian sector, right? It's kind of the same role when we're talking about the A team. And to me, what I love about IFS is it's a non-pathologizing process, right? It's about befriending. That's the word that we use, right? Befriending, respecting, honoring. And so it's about taking roll call. Who are the parts of you that are in your unit, internal unit, right? That are still fighting the fight? Is it a part of you that, doesn't know a fight it wouldn't fight, right? You're ready to duke it out at any turn. Let's lean into that and hear its story. Like, how has that part saved you? Like, what's the heroic role that part has played thus far in your life? Suspending judgment. And that can be difficult, right? Because people come into my office, and I know internally I have my own polarizations between those parts of a veteran that still want to, be in fighting mode, right? And then parts that know that really that's getting them into a whole load of trouble right now, right? And it brings up all kinds of shame and such, both inside and outside, right? And so trying to get some space from the shaming and the judgment to be able to just honor what it was that warrior part did to help in survival in the military, and then hopefully getting some space so that the veteran themselves, appreciating what it was they did, can provide some leadership to it, to kind of maybe create a new situational awareness of what is the threat in their lives right now, right? What is the actual threat level as compared to, on a recon mission in Vietnam, or, a mission outside the wire in Afghanistan, right? What is the actual threat level right now? Do you need to be coming at it with with all guns a-blazing here, or can we dial it back a little bit, right? So that self-leadership, it becomes really important, but it all starts with, I think, really befriending and hearing out the stories and really honoring.
And so how do you, and Stu, maybe you can answer this, how do you, like, day one, you come in, the veteran talks and you listen, and how do you sell them on IFS as a therapist? How do you get the buy-in by the veteran? Because there's scary words, right? Like, you have all these parts. What do you mean I have all these parts? So how do you get them to be comfortable with IFS and part work?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, but I want to back up just a little bit. So
Sure.
It's interesting to me that most vets that I've ever worked with who were in combat, somewhere in their brain are thinking about killing somebody. And I mean, it's just a really common fantasy.
Sure.
And I don't, civilians, I don't think they think like that very often, or at least I haven't met a whole bunch that do. And so it's useful to be able to think, okay, maybe I have a part of me, that is thinking that way. And maybe that's the part that served in the military. That already takes a little bit of the edge off of it. But if the veteran starts thinking like that, he can also scare himself, or she.
Yes.
And then guess what? They go live in the woods, or they do everything they can to avoid any kind of situation where there's a lot of human interaction, because they know they're going to get pissed off. And if they get pissed off, then they're afraid they might act on it. And I think one of the great things, and here's the other piece that I think's really the clincher, is deep down, I can't tell you how many people I've met who've been in combat that deep down think they're a monster, or they're a killer, or they're a beast, because at one time that part was so predominant and may have saved their life and maybe their whole platoon or company, and they're surprised to find out, a lot of people are, that they have that on board, and so IFS has like a different conception of all of that, and can help normalize it, can help actually make it okay. I mean, I tell people, well, listen, one of the images of God, for goodness sake, is of a lion. That's not a friendly animal. How are we going to reconcile all of this, and that's going to be an interesting discussion, because they've not really thought of either themselves as a good person, or of that part of them. It might be helpful in certain dire situations, but it's not really regarded as a friend. And I think IFS has a different approach that allows plenty of room for all of that, and can present it through them. I mean, they do the talking, I don't, and in an encouraging kind of a way. Now, on the question of how do you introduce that, and I see we have some question about that also from our participants. I'm not totally sure what to say about that, like, and here's why. Like, I have not had IFS work for every single client that I've had. There was one in particular who was a Marine who told me, knock off that shit, Stu. Like, we're, and I wanted to say to him, what part of you thinks we should knock it off? But, so I mean, I knocked it off. Internally, I was still thinking with some IFS kind of framework, but I knew don't start asking about parts or putting empty chairs out there. That's just, he's not going to like that. So I don't know that it's the panacea, and sometimes IFS gets presented that way. I have found it to be more helpful than any other orientation I've tried, and I've done a bunch of them. And the reason, I think, is because it's fairly clear. It's hugely, and many people, and it surprises me who intuitively kind of understands all of this. You don't have to explain anything; they got it. And then other people who I think, geez, he went to MIT. How come he can't get this? And they can, as a therapist, those guys can really work you over. you know, I mean, they get so far lodged in their cognitive process that they can't get out of it and experience life, but that's a different story. And I think
I
if
have
you
a
can
couple
even,
of thoughts.
okay, well, then just one more thing. Even if you can get somebody to realize that that war beast is part of them, but it's not all of them. It's not who they are. It's not their identity. That's huge. If you can get them to make that shift internally, man, you've done a healthy month's worth of work. Sorry. So what were you gonna say, Amy?
Yeah, well, so, and I know probably in the subsequent panel discussions, they'll get more into the grass on a lot of this stuff. But
Right.
what I would say is when I first started practicing IFS, I used it like a blunt instrument, you know, and, you know, felt like I needed to sell it and used parts language, you know, and that sort of thing. But as I've gotten, I think, more comfortable with it and more experienced with it, I don't use a lot of parts language, right? Like it's, you know, so let's really kind of sit with this anger for a minute, right? And a lot of this stuff isn't rocket science, and I think a lot of us do this anyways. But in IFS, there's this beautiful idea of direct access, right? Where I know that a person, especially when I start a session or start working with somebody, they're going to come in what we call blended with a part. They are their anger, or they are, you know, a protector. And what I know is I'm talking directly to that part of them. So if I'm talking to the monster, right, who's really angry, right, the importance is for me to know that, and for me to just stay curious and have some compassion towards the person, right? And then I'm curious about, you know, because you know, it's up to me at that moment to just really honor the fact that this part of this person that I'm sitting with right now had to do extreme things to bring this person home, right? And now that he's back, is taking huge amounts of shit for continuing to do some of these things, right? And is utterly confused, and maybe even ticked off that he's being misunderstood and can't fit in and that sort of thing, right? And so this idea of being blended with parts is helpful to me, because then I can hold space and then really invite the veteran to be able to say, so, you know, in this case, I'll just use Chris as an example. So Chris, you've heard, you know, we've heard that your anger, right, served a purpose. And you know, we've kind of heard a little bit of the story. Did you hear, like, what would your life have been like in Afghanistan without that anger or without that vigilance, right?
Yeah, I'd probably be dead.
Right.
I want to throw in a bit here. When I got out of the Marines in '69, I went back to college, and I didn't want to look back at anything. I just wanted to move forward. And fortunately, I got into the field of geology, and that's what I majored in. That's what I got my master's degree and PhD in. And that actually worked to my benefit, because I still spend a lot of time by myself in the mountains, in the jungle, not dealing with people. It's a safe way to go. My son, Jens, got his PhD in geophysics from Stanford, but he got his master's degree in geology. And when he was first in the field, the first time he was out in the field, I talked to him one night on the cell phone, and he said, "Dad, I hate the field." I said, "Jens, why do you hate the field?" He said, "There's no cell phone coverage, there's no people, and there's lots of snakes." And I said, "That's exactly why I like the field." Because it's a comforting experience to be out by yourself with nothing else out there except snakes. But that got me in trouble, though. Just going back to some of the things you said, Amy. When I got into management at the U.S. Geological Survey, starting in 1995, we were going through a real serious problem at the USGS. They were going through a reduction in force, and we had to fire a lot of people, a lot of good scientists, high-level scientists, over 1,000. And I got into management, and fortunately at that time we were rebuilding the USGS. So when we were rebuilding, it was okay because I had something to do. But once we rebuilt and I was still in management, it was boring. And I was always ready to get into some sort of a fight with anybody, particularly any other managers or managers above me. I just love to fight with them.
Say it's not true, Larry.
I just love to fight with them. But that got me in a serious problem. I had to retire in 2006 because PTSD had gotten so bad that I was in conflict constantly with people around me. And I wrote my retirement. I wrote my letter of dismissal, basically, for my manager. And I talked about how I had all these issues and I was able to retire. I stayed with geology, and unfortunately, I made many trips to Afghanistan after the USGS, trips to Tajikistan, trips to strange places. But that's what I live for. I live for that. So and I wanted to throw in one other thing. I never had anybody thank me for my service until I went into the DAV in 2003, I believe. And I was ready to kill myself at that time. And the DAV officer said, we got to get you some help. And he hooked me up with Annette Matlock. And as I was walking out, he thanked me for my service. And I broke down in tears. Now, when people thank me for my service, I say to them, do you know what you're thanking me for? I killed people. Why are you thanking me for that?
You're such a low-key guy. Oh, God. Marine.
Larry, that brings up a good point, though. And Chris and Stu, I don't know how you feel about it, but, you know, I think that people have become conditioned to say thank you for your service, you know, and sometimes for me, it doesn't feel very authentic. It seems kind of like just something that people do now. What are you more comfortable with in terms of, you know, the average bear or therapist? When somebody goes to a therapy, what are you comfortable with in terms of acknowledgement?
Are you asking me, Amy?
Yeah. Any one of you guys.
I actually, no, that's a difficult question to answer. I think I just am comfortable with being ignored. No, I served, and I'm not proud of the fact that I served. I'm not proud of the fact that I killed people. I'm not proud of the fact that I served in a war that was totally immoral. Vietnam was a war we should not have been fighting. And I know I can get in big trouble with Vietnam vets when I say that, because many of them feel differently. But I'm embarrassed about that. I'm ashamed of that. So I just assume be ignored. That's what, when I got out of the military, the first thing I did, aside from going back to college, was I let my beard grow and my hair grow. My hair was down to my butt. My beard was almost down to my stomach. I didn't want to be recognized. I just wanted to get on with life. So it's a hard question to answer, Amy. I don't know what.
Yeah.
Yeah, part of me is appreciative of it. Part of me feels like it's almost a rote, obligatory thing. Part of me likes it, you know? I mean, but then there's a question of how do you respond to that?
Yeah.
And that could depend on the part of the day or of the moment as to how you respond to that, you know? Stu, there's a few more questions rolling in, and I don't want to miss any of them. And I don't want to turn this into suicide, but suicide in the veteran population is a huge deal. It's enormous. The questions from Jane Strong says, do you think that veterans are taking their own lives because they don't want to hurt anyone? And I can't say no, right? I mean, that's a great possibility, because if you talk about that war beast and being able to do harm and fearing the fact that you have that capability and it could happen, right? Yes, that is a potential reason why a veteran might kill themselves. Certainly not the end of the list, right? What do you guys think about that?
So I have kind of a story there about that influences how I think about the whole thing, which is that, so one year I went to an American Psychological Association conference in Los Angeles, and I don't know, in the late afternoon, I was at the bar, and it turned out the guy sitting next to me was a psychiatrist from South Africa. And we got to talking about post-traumatic stress disorder and combat and such. And he told me about a case that he had with a South African tribesman who had been, I don't know, captured, beaten, tortured, put in a cell for years, and then eventually released. And the South African psychiatrist came into contact with him somewhere around that point. And he said, the thing that was amazing about this guy is that he seemed totally fine. He didn't really have any of the post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. He should have. But he said, I finally asked him, what do you attribute the fact that you just seem to be like a pretty regular guy? Everything's going okay in your life. And he said, well, the tribesman said, you wouldn't understand. You're a white man and you've never been in a tribe. And he said, for me, it's like the tribe is the ocean and I'm just a wave on the ocean. And so they can do whatever they want to the wave, but they can't do anything to the ocean. And that's where my whole identity really lies. And I thought that's a really good point in that I think, Chris, you were alluding to it earlier, that so when you're in the military and you're with a unit, that's your family. And you guys stick up for each other, you learn from each other, you appreciate each other, you realize when somebody's hurt, and try to pick up the slack for them. There's a kind of bond there that it's kind of unlike really anything else. I mean, maybe it happens on a good football team or something, but it's really strong, and there's a positive lesson to take out of that, but there's also a huge negative impact when that's all taken away. And I think that's part of what happens, with the reentry and homecoming. And I don't know, our country is not really made up of that kind of bond for the most part, and people miss it. And I remember wondering a lot of times, it was more back with the Vietnam, why did somebody sign up for another tour, for goodness sake? And I'm sure that happened in Afghanistan as well, and with you guys, I know there were these constant rotations back into the country, but I think, and I know there's research that supports it too, that what happens when you come home is like really important, the community support and the understanding. And I'm sure that's part of why we're all here today, is we're trying to do everything we can to help people understand what transpires, how do you change? And I've thought for years too, like, I don't know how many groups we've had over the years. On night number one, usually there's this instant connection, between people in the room. And it's like, yeah, they all know about the culture, the language, what to say, how many swear words you can get away. It's like a lot of little stuff, but it's kind of important, and it kind of helps people feel, I think, respected, honored, at home, comfortable. And I'm not sure that as a country we do a very good job of offering that. I've heard the Native Americans do much better than, maybe the rest of the country.
Just to riff off of what you're saying, Stu, in terms of, the welcome home, I think, what is it, 1%, 2% of the population actually raises their right paw and swears the oath and serves in the military. I mean, it's just such a tiny part of the population that has shouldered the responsibility of being in the military. And, I think that the idea or the experience of moral injury, right, where, in a war zone situation or just in the military in general, having to take action or be a part of a mission that rubs against what you're taught in a kind of a Judeo-Christian society, that goes counter to those beliefs, when you come, and we're talking, I mean, Larry's sharing has really kind of inspired this particular check-in of mine, having to kill people, right? Going into a situation, that is something we learned, thou shalt not kill, right? It's a bad idea to kill people. We learned that. And then we send 18, 19-year-olds off to do exactly that, have them come back to a community who barely knows half the time that they've been gone or when they've come back. And, thanks for your service. There's not a community holding of that responsibility for that soldier being in that position, or Marine in that position in the first place, right? Like the service member is left holding the bag of that moral injury, right? And that causes pain, that causes suffering within. That's a burden, right, in somebody's system. And while that's there, and then you confound that whole thing by this whole ethos of being individualistic and being a tough son of a gun that's not gonna squeak when you're hurt, right? And you're just gonna suck it up and drive on. You don't ask for help, right? Those folks carry that kind of moral injury for a long time, and it becomes overwhelming. And there are parts that are like, man, I know how to avoid all of this pain. It's just not worth it. Let's just check out. Let's just kill ourselves, right? And so, if we can help veterans come in and slowly at their system's pace, be able to talk about what it is that they experience and what parts of them hold these old beliefs, right, that they grew up in, right? And what runs counter to that to be able to heal from that moral injury, then the suicidal need is not going to be there like it has been. So, but we leave people holding the bag, I think, as a society. We don't share the responsibility for killing as a society at large.
A lot of good points there, Amy. Thanks. And Chris, so, and also we got, how about, here's one question. Let's try this one first. It had to do with, well, what if a veteran comes home and then he runs into various kinds of things that are triggers? So I don't know, doctor was mentioned as one possibility, and I know at least 2 doctors personally that could no longer do any surgery when they got back to the US. They just had seen so much trauma, and military weapons tear people apart in a way that's apparently pretty dramatic and hard to even explain if I guess you haven't seen it. And so what should somebody do when they come back and find themselves in one situation after another where they're getting triggered in their job? Maybe that was one question. And then Larry, there's somebody here that thinks you're an excellent person. I don't know if you saw that comment, and I'm not going to have a chance.
I didn't see that comment. I didn't see any of the comments, and that one I certainly will ignore.
No, he's got it right. But what do you guys think about so triggers? That they're all over the place, right?
Yeah, they're literally everywhere. One, is the veteran even aware of a trigger? And I think that is the first goal, is to get them to become aware of what's contributing to this emotion or this reaction instead of response, right? So I use reaction as a term for something that is emotion-based, and response for something that is logic or more thought out, right? And typically triggers are emotion-based, right? Because it reminds you of an IED, let's say, okay? And what that triggers in you is the emotion that you felt that very same day. And your brain really doesn't know the difference between 5 years ago and today, right? So one, are they aware of it? If they're aware of it, then we can start to talk about it, work on it, identify. You can go into grounding, mindfulness, heart map, breathing. There are all kinds of different things that you can use once the veteran is aware that that is a trigger. So I
Right.
think point one is awareness.
Yeah, that's very true. And there are many triggers that can get to us. My wife and I made a foolish decision 4 years ago, and we left Colorado and we moved to Florida. And as I mentioned before, we lived in this Nazi compound in Florida. And we were very crowded there, and there was all kinds of noise. And I didn't realize how much noise triggered reactions in me. Leaf blowers, lawn mowers. But in particular, one July 4th, some of the neighbors were setting off fireworks. And my little dog and my wife were hiding in the closet because the dog was so frightened by all these fireworks. And I ended up getting in my truck, driving around the neighborhood and stopping at each of these neighbors' house, telling them, "Don't do that. You're driving dogs and wives and women, kids and veterans into the corner." And I got myself in a little trouble that night, and a police officer came by, and
God, here we go again.
oh, Jesus. And he saw, when he came in the house, he realized that I was not totally berserk. I was just upset about the fireworks. And what he told me was a good bit of advice. He said, the next time in Florida, there's two times of the year when they can set off any fireworks they want. He said, next time this happens, next holiday that this happens, just get in your truck, go for a drive, just get out of here, stay away from these people. And it was a great bit of advice for me. So yeah, and another trigger that happens with me, it's very strange, is the smell of cooking rice. I can't tolerate the smell of cooking rice. And it took me the longest time to realize where that comes from. It comes from the Vietnam experience. And you can imagine the smell and some of the enemy is of rice.
It makes sense.
Mm.
So there's two important things. And I mean, one is know what the triggers are as best you can. And then number two, try to structure your life in such a way that you're not around them all the time. And sometimes that can mean some huge shifts, which are like the two I said, they had to change their profession. They could not work as medical doctors and surgeons anymore.
I can't eat rice.
Well, and maybe a third one of that is kind of, helping a person feel into what part of them is leading them into these places where there's a reenactment of the things that trigger them, right? So, who's driving the train in terms of coming home after, heavy combat in a war zone and quickly becoming a firefighter, paramedic, ER doc, whatever the case may be, right. Which I'm not pathologizing, but to be curious about that, right? What is it that part wants to accomplish by continuing to put you in those kind of high adrenaline, high responsibility circumstances, because it's one thing to do those jobs in a way where, you've processed your experiences and you're self-aware of what your triggers are and how to take care of yourself and that sort of thing. It's a whole nother thing to be a whole subconscious process, right? And you just time and time again throw yourself into the fire. And it's just, it has kind of a cumulative effect. It just burns the brake pads right off of that human being after a while.
Yeah. And so what do you tell a veteran that's in a position where he's triggered on a daily basis in a job that can't afford to leave the job, or he knows exactly what the trigger is? So where do you go there? I mean, there are.
I think it's a really, another important kind of a question. And I'm going to throw into here, I mean, I don't know what the rest of you think, but okay, so in here too, you gotta ask somewhere, what is this part trying to protect him from? By turning on his whole arousal system or hers, or wanting to go get in a fight or whatever it is. What's the point? What is that part trying to do? And to just sort of cut to the chase here, I'm thinking a lot of times it's trying to protect against sadness. You know, that I don't know how many times over the years I've seen that, where there will be an indication in a group of extreme sadness, and then you get ready for it, because what's coming next is anger, you know, and that doesn't leave any room for talking about the sadness that I would say is underneath it. And the protective part is trying to protect against having to go there, because sadness can leave us, I think, in a position where it's so strong that we might end up like in tears. We might end up incredibly dysfunctional. We might end up screaming. It hurts a lot, you know, and there are ways to get through that, but the military doesn't teach you anything about that, for goodness sake. And you have to be vulnerable in order to allow room for how powerful sadness is. And that's the other thing. Military, I mean, they can't afford to have people being vulnerable. You do that in a firefight, you're going to get a lot of people hurt, you know. So I think again, like, you know, I'm kind of a IFS proponent, but there are ways that we can do this with IFS and other therapies too, for that matter, and help people actually realize that the sadness is, in addition to other things, it's a great gift, you know, and it's a lead into sensitivity and compassion. So I don't know, we got to get that done, but that's a hard place to go.
I think our parts are brilliant, right? Like, I think our parts are aware of how to use the autonomic nervous system, right? When the situation demands. So if you're thinking through the lens of polyvagal theory, right? If you're in kind of a collapsed, dorsal, depressed, you know, life-threatening place where you're sad or just down in the dumps, that's dangerous, right? That reminds me of Larry talking about he didn't have anything to do, and when he had the lull, that felt really unsafe for him, right? I think we have parts that know that doesn't feel good. Let's try to get ourselves a sympathetic rush to our nervous system by finding somebody to have a scuffle with, right? Or getting ourselves into a high stress situation. I think our parts are brilliant about trying to use the nervous system, our bodies, to deal with exile energy.
I'm really glad I took part in this today, because you just pointed out something, Stu, about sadness that I hadn't thought about. And I'm going to think about that a lot now, because I think you're right. It's an emotion I just do not like. I don't want to be sad, period.
It's like holding your hand over a burning candle or something. Hey, so we only got a couple of minutes left, and I need to say a few more things. You know, the first one, I can't believe I'm going to say this on the air here, but I love you guys. Pretty cool that we can do this.
You too, my friend. You too, my friend.
Yeah, this is amazing to me, that we can have this talk. Had a lot of trepidation about doing this. Well deserved. But I also want to thank Toufic Hakim. He's the executive director of the foundation, and we can see him, but I don't think you guys that are participants can. But this wouldn't happen without him. He's an incredible guy. I hope you get to meet him. And I also appreciate the foundation's willingness to sponsor this kind of a thing. And we've got 2 more coming up. The next one I think is December 3rd. And I think you'll find that one pretty interesting if you decide you might want to come. Among other things, I'm looking forward to talking about how do we know anything, you know, and that leads right into how do we know whether we should trust psychotherapeutic research or not, and or what parts of it can we trust and what parts need a lot more emphasis and underscoring and further exploration. Anyway, I think that's going to be an interesting discussion. Plus, We've got in there a good bit more about IFS work, what's involved with it in particular when in working with military veterans. And then the third session is kind of going to be all about IFS and what do we think are its advantages and limitations, and what things does it really work well with, and maybe which ones we still have a long ways to travel with it and we don't know. So I'm really happy that we've got a bunch of participants and that people are interested in this stuff. I think it's super important. I think there's many things that are embedded in the military experience and in particular in the combat experience that we all would do well to know more about. And there's a lot of mystery that's still embedded in it that has to do with the common experience of human beings. It's just that it gets highlighted in an extreme kind of a way in combat that all of us could profit from. So thanks for showing up.